function of the hippocampus. He will have a short-term memory. Will he remember stuff before the accident? Yes, he has a hard disk. He has long-term memory. The problem is that if he goes to the restaurant and looks at the menu and say, okay, I want to order this pizza, okay, and then he will go to the restrooms and maybe he will talk with someone. He comes back after 10 minutes. He will not remember the menu. He will not remember the pizza. He will not remember the waitress. Actually, there's a nice scene over there in the movie. So that's a good description. So what does he do? He does two things. First of all, he takes Polaroid pictures and write about them like one sentence that will say, this is a suspect. This happened. This is what I know. So the next time he forgets, he can go back, and this will be a new short-term memory. And if he has really important discoveries, what does he do? Those who saw the movie? He tattoos them on his body. So every morning he wakes up, he doesn't remember what's going on, he goes to the mirror, then he sees everything. It reminds him the story. Give me a second. To me, the coolest thing about this with regards to our story is that it puts us, the audience, in the same position as he is. Why? Because the movie goes backwards. Because the first scene is chronologically the last scene. And as we progress in the movie, every time we go back. So every time we go to a new scene, we don't know what happened before, and we are in the same position as he is. And if it's not confusing enough, there's another set of scenes that do go chronologically forward. So it's a crazily, almost disturbing and definitely complicated movie. I loved it, but I really recommend it. I had a question here. He needs to see them. The question was, what happens with the pictures? He cannot load them into, he doesn't have a hippocampus. But he addresses them again and again as short-term memory, which is fine. He can make this. He can look at the menu and say, I want this pizza. Okay? You just don't remember that there's pizza in the menu, in the long run. Isabel? In long-term, non-declarative memory, in the physical memory. No, the premotor cortex. Okay? The part that we said that makes a plan on the typing. Remember we said what will happen if something is compromised there, if there's an accident. We said we'll go and type like this until we teach ourselves again. That's what physical is. The same as playing the piano, riding the bike, or any of that physical memory. Okay? Maria? You can, well, the hippocampus is, of course, essential for that. You still need the premotor cortex. So let me separate it two parts. You still need to have enough premotor cortex that you can compensate. That's one thing. Now, the hippocampus is responsible for the more of the declarative, the data, the numbers, the faces, the data part. Less about the physical part, which will be the premotor cortex. I don't want to say that the hippocampus is not involved at all, because as always, everything is involved in everything. But that's the main function. This is so fascinating memory, right? And unfortunately, we cannot extend. I'm going to have a last question and then I'll remember. Yeah. Yes, so it goes, the hippocampus is sending the short-term into all parts of the brain responsible for the memory. Okay. This is the hippocampus, just beautiful. Rainbow. And with that, we're going to move. We have a bit less than half an hour. We're probably not going to finish it today. We're going to finish it on Tuesday. To talk about sensation. In the past, when I started teaching this course, I would just go and talk about some special organs, special senses like the eyes, hearing. They're wonderful, they're amazing, but I felt that we were missing the big picture. So I decided to ditch those and focus more on the general idea of sensation, which is what we're going to do here. Okay? So we mentioned the fact, remember that when we talk about a circuit, neural circuit, any circuit, it has to be starting with sensory receptors. So we're going to talk about them. And these are our learning objectives, to talk about different information or kinds of information, to describe, to classify sensory receptor based on modality. We'll see what modality, and to give an example of how three types come together to give us an important function. We start with the sensory receptors. That's a simple definition. Structures specialized to detect the sensory stimulus. I use the word structure, I didn't use cells. Why? Because they're not necessarily cells. There are sensory receptors that are cells. There are sensory receptors that are more complex cells that are encapsulated. There are some that act as organs, and in many cases, these are not real cells, these are nerve endings, so just part of a cell. Many, not all, but many of our sensory receptors in the skin are nerve endings, not all. The common theme, common ground for all of these, the common function is the fact that they can transduce. What is transduce or what is transduction? They can convert an input, sensory input, into a nerve signal. When I say a nerve signal, I say what? What do I mean when I say a nerve signal? An action potential. By the way, in many cases, at the level of the sensory receptors, they will just generate a local potential, not an action potential. But if that local potential is strong enough and reaches a threshold, that will generate an action potential in the neurons. So this can be a sound, touch, pressure, light, anything you can imagine. I mentioned it last time. Do they sense? Let's see if we remember something from Tuesday. Do they sense? What do we sense? Cerebral cortex, right? They do not sense. That's a common misconception. I every now and then use that term when I talk about sense, so correct me if I'm saying that, because they don't sense. Sensation is subjective awareness, conscious of the stimulus. Most sensory signals delivered to the central nervous system produce no conscious sensation. I gave you the examples of pH, of blood pressure, and many others. They will be filtered out in the brainstem, okay, and they will reach only the lower parts of our brain, and this is where they're going to reach. That's it. If they don't reach the cerebral cortex, we're not aware of them. Okay? And since I'm just going, because we're a bit short in time, if you feel I'm rushing too much and you have questions, just raise your hand. Hopefully see it. Okay. We can talk about 4 kinds of information. We'll address each of them. Some I will explain, some you guys will predict. Modality, location, intensity, and duration. We'll start with modality. Modality is the type of stimulus or the sensation. Right? Visual is one modality, while sound is another modality. So we have, in a way, expert sensory receptors for a given modality. Look at your laptop. If you don't have a laptop, look at your notes or look at your smartphone. Just find something to look at. What's the taste? What's the taste of your laptop? Savory, sweet. Hopefully you didn't try it. You definitely did not try it now, right? You viewed. So what I'm asking you is to think about what do you think or what can you predict. You didn't read about this, so just use your rationale and thinking. How does your brain know that you just watched, visualized your laptop and not tasted it? Is it going to be a different type of action potential? Maybe it's going to be one will be plus 30 and another one will be plus 20. Maybe it's going to be depolarization, hyperpolarization under, and the other one will have a bit of a different action potential. What do you think, first of all, about the last question? Yes or no? No. Action potential, just one. All or none phenomenon. It cannot be the type of action potential. So think together. Okay, let's talk a bit and think, how can our brain know that I just watched my laptop and I did not taste my laptop because I got those inputs? The back today. Yes.
Like separate.
So all action potentials are the same. So I would think that like the location of the nerve and like so where the like nerve starts and where it ends.
Where it ends,
right?
exactly. It's the architecture, right, of our nervous system. It's the idea of where it's coming from and where it goes to. If I watch my laptop, right, I have some, not all, some of my rods and cones will be stimulated based on wavelength, etc. and that will generate an action potential, not in them, but in following neurons, eventually the optic neuron. And a given rod will be responsible for a given pixel, will send a signal through that optic nerve, and the optic nerve has millions of neurons, but I'm talking about one specific neuron, and that neuron will go, after synapsing in the thalamus, will go to a very specific cell and synapse with it, where? Visual what? Cortex, right? The primary cortex in a specific cell, and will generate an action potential. So that cell in the occipital lobe, the visual cortex, is basically connected physically through synapses to the visual receptors. And this is how our brain and our cerebral cortex makes the sense of saying, I just watched something. A signal will come from the taste bud, will go to the taste, the olfactory cortex. That's the difference. If I turn the switch on, it will turn these lights or these bulbs, because there is wiring going directly to them, and they will not be starting or stimulated by a different switch, because that switch is leading to different points, etc. And we call this the labeled line code. Labeled line code. All action potentials are identical. Each nerve pathway from sensory cells, or receptors, not just cells, to the brain is labeled to identify its origin, and the brain uses these labels to interpret the modality that signal represents. And this is the case when you can think about what if, and things will happen when we have pathologies. Just a second there. Isabel? Because sometimes it's not the usual one. We cannot really do this exercise here because there's just too much light. But I'm pretty sure you know this, right? If you think about your complete darkness, and then you close your eyes, like complete darkness, what will happen if you really press hard mechanically on your eyes? You'll see glimpses of lights, right? You didn't see anything. It's still dark. But what you did, you mechanically activated the optic nerve. But because the optic nerve goes to occipital lobe and to visual cortex, the visual cortex says light. That's what I know. I don't know mechanical. Okay? One of the interesting phenomena is something that's called phantom pain. People who lose their limbs and still feel pain in the missing limb. Now, one of the reasons for that, especially in the beginning, after the loss of the limb, is that you still have nerve endings and they continue to fire an action potential. That's one thing. But even after that, we sometimes see interesting adjustments. How do we call that, if we look at the cerebral sensory cortex, how do we call this map of the body parts? Remember? How do we call it? So, somatotopy, right? So, here is for you a somatotopy right here on the left. This specific region is responsible for the arm. But what happens is that if you lost the limb, what we see that over time, some of the other parts are basically taking over, including part of your face. And sometimes we see people who lost, let's say, the left arm, and when they shave with the right arm, they feel that they touch their left arm, that is not there. The face becomes their arm sensation-wise because of that somatotopy. Kind of like skewed or abnormal somatotopy. That's the labeled line code. Isabel, you had a question? Sorry, about? Vestigia can be, do you want to tell the audience what does it mean? Right, you can sometimes feel that you'll grasp, you'll sense colors, for example, in a different way. You might feel like you're tasting them, etc. So yeah, that's basically the idea. That's the labeled line code. Now, in many cases, it will be at the level of the cerebral cortex and not at any physical level of the neurons. It's typically in the cerebral cortex. But yeah, that's the idea. We are missing the labeled line code, and when I mentioned that flexible brain book, remember about different adaptations, this is what happens in many cases. The code is now different. Other parts are taking over. That's modality. This is how we distinguish between one modality and the next. Let's talk a bit about location. I mean, we mentioned location in a way, but I want to address location in another sense. So encoded by which nerve fibers are issuing signals to the brain. So for example, if location-wise, if I touch the desk in my left, right, I will get an information because it will reach a specific location, which will be my right sensory hemisphere, so I will know it's a left. I will also know whether I'm touching this part, right, look at me, this part of my finger, touch the desk, or this part of my finger, touch the desk. I can tell that, right? So I get different inputs because we have different sensory receptors here. And one of the cool things about it is to remember is what we call receptive fields. So a receptive field is the area that is controlled. I don't want to say the word sense because receptors do not sense, but is controlled by or being perceived by one single sensory receptors. Okay? So for example, if we look at the skin and we look at the back of that person, this is a pretty big receptive field. It can be 10, maybe 15 centimeters wide. Okay? So there's a major, big part that is covered by this specific receptor. Well, if we look at our digits, our fingers, we can see that we have smaller receptive fields. Now, a sensory receptor can either generate the action potential in the nerve or not, right? So this one, can you tell whether you're touching this point or this point? No. There's a test called two-point discrimination. If you touch this person in this point, she'll say, I feel that you're touching the back of my back. But if you touch closely enough, she will feel exactly in the same spot. Why? Because there's only one. There's a big receptor field, a large receptor field, and only one receptor. While with your fingers, they're much more sensitive. And of course, it makes a lot of sense because you need your fingers to be much more sensitive compared to your back. That's location. Yeah, I talked too much. I want you guys to talk now. So we're going to talk about intensity. I want you to use everything that we learned so far. Okay? So we need to tell ourselves, I need to tell myself that I just touched something strongly or weakly, or I hear a loud voice, right? Or a weak voice. We need to get the kind of information that we need with regards to amplitude. So how strong the stimulus is. Can we maybe make the plus 30 into plus 45 when it's really hard? No, we cannot. For that, we need to change channels. We cannot do that every time we speak a bit louder. So work with your peers to think of possible ways. There are 3 possible ways by which we can get different information about intensity. Think at least about one of them.
Perceptive was deeper in the skin.
I had 3 groups, and we got 2 out of the 3, but I still need a 3rd. So, who wants to suggest some ideas that you thought about? Yes?
The number of neurons firing.
Wonderful. First of all, I can increase the input by increasing the number of neurons that fire. In order to increase the number of neurons to fire, I need to increase the number of sensory receptors that will be ignited or stimulated, right? So if I touch something or touch something with more receptors, my cerebral cortex will understand this was more touch, stronger touch, of course, a stronger stimulus because we activated more. Wonderful. That's one. Anyone else want to suggest something else? Diego. So they will be responsible for the mechanical force, but how would you know it's a stronger force? I mean, it's still at the end of the day, it will be action potential, right? That goes all the way to the brain. So how do you know that this is going to be stronger? You got more neurons, that's one thing. One way to provide a stronger stimulus will be the seed. Wonderful. The second one will be frequency. Okay? If I fire more action potential in a greater frequency, my sensory cerebral cortex part will translate that into I just received a stronger stimulus. That's the way we sound, that's the way we hear. What happens is actually that when we are speaking louder, hearing organs, sensory receptors in our ears, are basically starting to fire more rapidly. And it's confusing because we think frequency, we think about pitch, but actually it's not the pitch. The frequency of action potentials provide us with information about the strength of the stimulus, the amplitude. Can anyone think of a third? Anyone suggested any other idea? Isabel? Give me the difference. Okay, you use a word. That's the word I was actually looking for. Thresholds. Wonderful. We can have different sensory receptors in different areas with different thresholds. I can have, if I touch something, I can have, let's use ligand because we use ligand so much that I guess we feel more comfortable with this. I might have a sensory receptor for a ligand-gated channel that is open only if we have, let's say, I'm just throwing numbers, 10 molecules of that ligand. But I can also have in the same areas a few of sensory receptors that will open up only if I have 30 molecules. So if these ones with a higher threshold are being stimulated and start to work, my cerebral cortex will translate it into, we got a stronger stimulus right now. Why? Because specific cells were stimulated by sensory receptors that have high thresholds. These are the three ways by which we can perceive a sense of a stronger stimulus, not by changing the action potential. Any questions about this? Yes? So remember, we mainly talk about voltage-gated channels, right? But let's talk about mechanical gated channels, okay? I have receptors here that I'm touching. Now, the touch receptors are just like doors, right? You can open them or not open them. Now imagine, I'll give you very simplistic numbers because these are not the real numbers. Imagine that in this area that I just touched, okay, I have 20 doors, okay? Each door is a nerve ending that is going to go into one neuron that goes into one given cell in the cerebral somatosensory cortex, right? Great. Now imagine that 15 of these doors, once they're all, they just need a little bit of a push to open. So if they're activated, if you just touch it lightly, they will be activated, and now I'll get 15 signals going to the brain. And the brain will say, I just touched here in this area. But there are 5 doors, 5 channels that are heavier. In order to open them, you need more force. So this light touch will not really open them, but if it's not just light touch and I push and they will open up, I will say, oh, these 5 doors open as well. That means this was not light touch. That was a stronger stimulus. We'll complete the story on Tuesday. We have a voice thread for the end of your